Afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Can I get a motion to go into 68th special session? Moved by Lou.
Second.
Second by Austin. Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. First issue is the approval of an ordinance for the acquisition of 319 Summit Avenue.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move to approve an ordinance for the purchase of property known as 319 Summit Avenue, funding for the acquisition, removal of the structure, and creation of additional green spaces from Maryland Program Open Space and City Funds as outlined in the attached March 19, 2019 memo.
Second.
Okay, discussion?
Yes, I'd like to know, does approval of this forbid us from not tearing down the structure if we determine that there's a good use for that structure along the cultural trail?
Okay. It doesn't have to be torn down, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be torn down.
Yeah.
I don't think it requires us to tear it down. Really what you're approving is the acquisition agreement at its essence. They started the environmental study yesterday. They told me they'd be done with it towards the end of the month. So I was planning on coming back to a work session early May to have a conversation about what we're going to do with it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't signing our death warrant here if we decided we want to reuse that building for,
The agreement doesn't say anything about tearing it down. That's really what you're approving,
okay,
in my opinion.
all right.
Anybody else? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Adoption of an ordinance, City of Hagerstown, general obligation debt.
Mr. Mayor, we move to adopt an enabling ordinance authorizing the City of Hagerstown to sell and issue from time to time upon its full faith and credit general obligation bonds in one or more series in an original aggregate principal amount not to exceed $3.105 million. Proceeds of the bonds will be used to finance, reimburse, or refinance costs of the projects identified in Section 3B of the ordinance. All projects' debt service are allocated to the general fund. The ordinance also authorizes the sale and issuance from time to time upon the city's full faith and credit of 1, general obligation bond anticipation notes in one or more series in an original aggregate principal amount not to exceed $3.105 million to fund project costs on an interim basis. 2, general obligation refunding bonds in an original aggregate principal amount not to exceed 130% of the aggregate principal amount of any bonds being refunded in order to reduce debt service cost or achieve debt service restructuring. Details of any such general obligation bond anticipation notes or general obligation refunding bonds are authorized to be determined or provided for by resolution. Any series of such general obligation bonds, bond anticipation notes, or refunding bonds may be issued as a single instrument. Staff is hereby directed to work with the city's financial advisor and bond counsel to determine whether a direct purchase transaction for the bonds as contemplated by the ordinance remains the best financing option for the city and to develop the necessary detailed resolution and other documents required to prepare for the sale and issuance of the bonds as contemplated by the ordinance, including any request for proposal to determine the purchaser as specified in the ordinance, details and authorizations. Regarding the amount, timing, final method of sale or sales, and other sale details will be outlined in a detailed resolution to be presented to this body for approval at a future date prior to the issuance of the bonds.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Approve a resolution, settlement and release agreement with Free State Ventures, Inc.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and council approval of a resolution to enter into a settlement agreement and mutual release with Free State Ventures Incorporated, 453 Antietam Street, LLC, and Hagerstown Antietam, 453 West Trust for purposes of settling a dispute related to real property located at 453 West Antietam Street, Hagerstown, Maryland.
Second.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, moving out of the special session, work session, fiscal year 20 budget review and discussion.
Michelle and Jennifer, and while they're walking up, I'll start it off. We utilize the word partnership in our business dealings with all of the groups in the city that we deal with. And I can tell you, in my 41 years nearly of service, this has been a true partnership. I'm proud to be part of the fiscal year budget team for fiscal year 20, which, encompasses all departments for the information that's input. For Michelle, it's Michelle, Jeff, Jennifer, Jason, Barb, Brooke, Tyler, and Christine, the amount of hours and time they put in, along with all the department level staff. We've provided the mayor and council with a balanced budget with a 0% tax increase, of which we're all very proud. And hopefully our citizens are just equally as proud. And most importantly, we will provide the same level of service that our citizens have grown to expect from us without any decrease in the level of those services. So kudos to everyone on the budget team. We'll have some discussion through it. I'm sure we need to make a few adjustments and changes through. We'll work through that with everyone. And with that, I'll give it to Michelle and Jennifer. Thank you all.
So this evening, we know that the budget information was just distributed and made available out on our website. And again, it's a tremendous amount of information. So we thought tonight we would try to keep it short and sweet, just do a very high level, not getting into the too many specific details, because we will have additional work sessions throughout the month of April and May to go to that level. But first, I'm just going to turn it over to Jennifer, I think, because one of the first things is when somebody sees either the book or they go online and see 470 some pages, it's a little bit intimidating, because yes, they can get the information, but where do you start in 470 pages?
So, nice bright yellow cover this year. A little bit of a change from the past previous years. On your, I
It is.
know, sunshine.
See? Brings a smile.
So on the front cover, we made a few changes. Listed here is your vision statement, your mission statement, and your core values that you approved back in November. And again, this is just the proposed budget for FY20. Your mayor and council goals that used to be listed on that front cover are now on the back of your very first cover. So these are your brand new 2018-2020 mayor and council goals and priorities that you voted on back in November. So again, like Michelle said, I'll go through just quickly through all the sections so that we can have a high-level look, and so that people who want to look through the 470 pages online can do so and can kind of understand how it starts in the beginning with high-level stuff and ends with more detail by departments. So again, the preface section, again, is just a really quick overview of the community, as well as the table of contents. That is a good idea to start if you're looking for something specific. Section 1, which is your overview. This year, Mike presented us with his city administrator's message. So that starts out the overview section, and then it moves on into the City of Hagerstown's budget message. Again, that message is high level, but we changed it up a little bit. There's a lot of charts, there's a lot of information in there that, again, at a higher level, but with some detail, so that if you want to dig any deeper, you can go back into the other sections. On page 44, we actually added a new matrix. This is helpful to help people if they're looking for something, don't know what fund it's in, don't know, what type of fund it is, and it also tells you what section you can go to look at that information. Again, the new mayor and council goals are listed in there, which Eric Hastings helped out to put it together. They're for the 2018-2020 year. And then behind that is the departmental goals. So that's kind of just the overview section. Section 2 is the general fund. Again, this is where it starts into more detail of what the general fund entails. It begins with the first couple pages of just general information about the general fund, and then it digs deeper into each department. And then under each department, there's department summaries, performance indicators, the financial summary for each department, which shows you the FY18 actual, and then an FY19 budget, an FY19 estimate, and then your FY20 proposed. Again, a lot of detail in there for each department. And again, like Mike said, each one of the departments definitely helped with the program summaries and the performance indicators.
And just as a reminder, the general fund is the largest fund within the city that is a governmental fund and is largely covered through the ability to raise and assess real estate property tax, about 69%.
The next section, which is the enterprise funds, this is electric, water, wastewater, parking, golf, and property management. Again, this is the details, so this is your program summaries and your financial summaries. Section 4, which is the special revenue funds. This is CDBG, economic redevelopment, business revolving loan, forest conservation, upper floors, flexible spending, and excise tax. Again, a lot of detail in each individual fund. Section 5, which is your service trust funds, workers' comp, healthcare, dental care, and Bloom Carlisle. Again, a lot of information with detail behind it. Section 6, this is where it starts looking for future years. These are the financial projections. So each one, we have the general fund, electric, water, wastewater, parking, golf, property management, healthcare, and dental. And what this does is this actually looks at the past 2-year actuals. And then again, it looks at your FY19 budget, your FY19 estimate, your FY20 proposed, but then it takes it a step further and looks at your FY21, 22, 23, and 24 projections going forward.
And this is the section where instead of everything being put in, out to the exact dollar, everything is rounded off to the thousands. Again, because it is so much information, you start to get a lot of information in these charts, and they start getting really, really small. So you have to do this to be able to read and see what the words are. So 5-year projection section is that section.
Section 7 is your capital improvement programs, and this is for FY20 through 24. So again, the first couple pages just give you a lot of general information, gives you some of our summary sheets to show you as a total, this is how much money is being sent for capital improvements. And then behind it is a detailed sheet of every, what we call CIP program that we have out there. Gives you a summary of what the CIP is for, as well as for FY20 through 24, how much money there that is needed for each of those CIPs.
And it is by far and large the biggest portion in the budget, because all the individual projects, again, are listed here.
Section 8, just a user fee schedule. Again, it has the FY19 as well as the FY20 proposed user fees. And then the final section is Section 9, which is just your glossary and your fiscal policies. Again, I'd like to thank our team upstairs. With the help of the departments, we were able to stay on target to get the budget to you by last Friday. And like I said, it's 470 pages for your reading pleasures.
And so this evening, and actually, the information will be available throughout, but really and truly, when you look at this entire thing, if you were a person that didn't want to go through and look at the nitty-gritty level details, and you wanted what most consider to be our executive summary, or where you can find the most information that covers the majority of city operations, that's really going to be in the overview section in Section 1 within the first 42 pages, and it is called the budget message. So what we did is over on the desk for anybody who would like copies, because again, not everybody likes to go out online, not everybody likes to carry around our budget books, but again, it is going to provide by far a really nice layout, high level, big important factors that we're facing, not just fiscal year 20, but a little bit of information for out years as well. So in Section 1, one of the first things that we have on page 2 and 3 that we're covering is Mr. Spiker already pointed out, covers our assessable base and our property tax rate. So just as a reminder, we are not, in this proposed budget, have any changes for our real estate tax rate or the corporate personal property tax rate. The real estate tax rates are 1.002 per $100 of assessed value for all categories except apartments, and the apartment categories are 1.032 per $100 of assessed value. Right now, currently, we do not have anything else in place to set personal property rates differently, so everything defaults to 2.5 times the real estate rate. So our personal property rates are 2.505, or about $2.51 per $100. We have anticipated that we're going to have a growth of approximately 1.5% in this fiscal year 20 budget. We received the information from the state assessors and taxation department, and it included for our third and final year that we would see growth, but only of about 0.5%. When we went back and looked at our trends and looked at like our 25-year history, it really looks like in our third and final year, we have been seeing on a consistent basis about 1.5% to 2%, and that's because in the third and final year, the number of appeals and abatements have gotten much smaller. So fiscal year 20 is our third and final year. That means next December, November, December, properties will be reevaluated, and then those assessed values will go in place, and hopefully it's going to be a growth for fiscal year 21. As long as we achieve this 1.5% growth on the assessed values, that will equate to approximately $263,000 for every penny. And I know that many here say that's not quite the way to best get the information out publicly, but again, I just want to make sure that we mention it. It's a statistic that we've always included, and it's found in multiple places without. The other thing on pages 2 and 3, you're going to see the breakdown. So of all the, for every dollar that we get from real estate taxes and personal property tax, 52 cents of that, or 52%, is spent in public safety. The other largest majority, 13% or 13 cents, is spent in general government. And then one of the nice things is when you go to general fund and you look at general government, you'll be able to see all those individual areas that make up that detail. Next, page 4, one of the priorities, and one of the things we definitely want to make sure that we put out there for the community and anybody who's looking at this, is how important and vital the urban improvement project is with all of our partners and, of course, the city's participation that we have done. It's definitely something that's larger than the city, but it has value for all of our citizens. On page 5, we've included a new chart, and this is just so that we can take a step back and look at all of our economic programs and our economic incentives. So when we looked at which funds these incentives right now are in fiscal year 20 budget, we have about 1.1 million in city local dollars throughout the budget book for economic incentive programs. Again, thank Jill and her staff. They did a great job of giving us like 3 to 4 pages. We weren't able to incorporate all the details on all the incentives, but of course, all the information and the links on the incentives are out on our City of Hagerstown website. But that is a good chart. It's a little hard to see, but something that we added this year. Page 6, high level, general fund reserves. Typically, we do not utilize fund balance reserves from the general fund in order to balance our budget. This year, we did utilize $818,000. That $818,000 was because we had a fiscal year 18 surplus in our general fund, which allowed us to utilize that surplus to invest in capital infrastructure projects and still maintain our levels in compliance with our general fund and retained earnings policy. But there's a chart on page 6 that just tells you the items, gives you the number of the actual projects, and then you can go back to the capital improvement section and look at those individual projects to get detailed on what we're utilizing those for. Another big item that Mr. Spiker, Mike mentioned earlier, is the fact that in this budget book, we did not change the level of core services and or anything that we're currently providing as a community amenity. So on page 7, I think last year, so this will be probably the second or third year where we tried to implement a chart that listed what we felt were amenities. First half of the chart will reflect fiscal year 19 estimated projections, and the second half of the chart shows fiscal year 20 budget. Again, I apologize because this is one that has so much information. The chart gets a little small. But again, our amenities are not just strictly within the general fund here at the city. So we've broken it out by fund. But fiscal year 20 budget in the general fund, if you go clear to the right. So when we talk about things, farmers market, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later, Potterfield Municipal Pool, Hager House, Train Museum, Municipal Stadium, all of our other many and various parks throughout the city, the ice rink, all of our recreation programs that we have, and then the events. So for fiscal year 20, when we looked at all the expenses, both operating and capital, plus any of the monies or revenues that we were bringing in to help offset it, general fund is looking at a $4.5 to $4.6 million need that is going to be heavily relying upon real estate property taxes to help cover. I'm going to skip a couple pages to page 10. There's a lot of information, and it's a citywide chart, and it has information that dates back to fiscal year 11 on all wage adjustments that we have done through what is currently proposed for fiscal year 20. And just as a reminder, we do have 4 collective bargaining units, and all of those contracts are currently approved and in place for the next several years. So what you see included for all 4 of the union contracts under the proposed budget at the bottom of that chart are something that is already in place. And last but not least, the non-union full-time group, it is included in the fiscal year 20 budget that all full-time employees would receive an enhancement. So non-union is proposed to have a 1-step increase on anniversary date. Next, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but the next few pages, we took a step back, and this is where Jennifer was mentioning where we changed things up a little bit, and we have to thank Mike for allowing us and being flexible and being willing to allow us to do this. But when we went back and we took a look, we said, the next couple of pages, we start numbering. And we put things like the Parks Department, and we put exactly what you would find on parks a little further back. And while it's good information, it's already in multiple places throughout. So what we tried to do is take a bigger picture and found that, much to Jennifer's dismay, I kept adding all these charts. I kept adding extra pages on. But information like page 11 on our debt service, one of the things that we realized was we have this debt policy, we're within our limits. We put debt information throughout here, but one of the things we put in our policy is that we're going to stay, that our annual debt service requirements would only be a certain percentage of total operating expenditures per fund. But we never really come back and report that out to this group or put it out there publicly. So that's one of the first charts that you'll see. And then just from the perspective of debt, as we go through and start targeting details, we are anticipating that we're going to have to issue debt in each of our next 5 years, fiscal year 20 through 24, for a multitude of capital improvement projects. The rest of the section, the other thing that we did with this is that we listed if it was citywide, and we again took the step back and said, let's organize it. Let's do a couple bullets, things that are citywide. Let's come back and literally call it and title it if it's a general fund, and then go to our business type funds and such. So that's really, as you go through here, hopefully it's a little bit more easier to use, more user friendly. And within all of them, I think you're going to find that we still reference sections that has the details and other pages that you can look to find all that. So I think big message, and I know that I sent out a lot of emails, and Jennifer helps, and Mike as well, trying to give updates on where we were. And I guess I'm going to come back and I'm going to just say, in section 1 on page 12, under general fund highlights, the very first item, number 5, that paragraph specifically addressed, because I know we've all heard the question, you were at $3.4 million deficit when we last said here publicly on February the 5th at a work session. What did you do to change that $3.4 million deficit? Where did you make your adjustments to get it balanced? So that bullet, number 5, just goes into those, again, high level, where we concentrated and the efforts that we did collectively across the city to make that happen. I think in the memo, and again, we promised to keep this short, so I'm not going to try to keep you too much longer, but in the memo that we included in the packet, Again, just big, high-level things. We're gonna hit the general fund, which we already did, talk about real estate taxes. But one of the other sources of revenue, cable franchise revenue, it's only at 50%. We've only included 180,000, and that's because we're still waiting to hear. There's some pending legislation going through FCC, and it could impact us, hopefully. If something drastic were to happen and we get nothing, we have Plan B in place to cover that 180,000. Or if something great happens and we get an additional 180,000, we've already got plans to spend that as well. Highway user revenue. For the first time since fiscal year 10, or fiscal year 9, we've actually included utilizing highway user revenue within a general fund. So total, we're getting 1.7 million in highway user revenue next year for fiscal year 20, which is 26% higher than what we received in fiscal year 19. So that's terrific, a step in the right direction. We included a chart this year right in the front, so that you could see like our history back to fiscal year 9 when we got almost $2 million down to fiscal year 20. But the 275,000 is literally going to cover a portion of annual debt service requirements that several of Rodney's larger projects that we didn't have highway user revenue, it had dwindled. So one of the things we did was we bond financed in order to get them done. An eligible use of highway user revenue is to cover that debt service requirement. So again, $275,000 of revenue in the general fund that typically we would not have and wouldn't have been able to do, quite frankly, in prior years without the restoration. And again, not fully restored, but certainly at much higher levels than we had been in the last couple years. The next couple things, there's 3 things that are really one-time revenue dollars. So while fiscal year 20 budget, I don't know that there's really anything too significant or controversial or drastically different from current practice. We do have between 3 items about $1.7 million included that are one-time in nature. So when we look at 5-year projections and we start talking about fiscal year 21, we got to talk about proactively what we want to do to help cover it if and when we don't have those in the future. One of those is $580,000 from the health insurance fund because the health insurance fund had a fiscal year 18 surplus. Again, I mentioned earlier, $818,000 in general fund balance reserves. All of the projects that we included in fiscal year 20 budget, and again, we made reductions and we deferred and we took some out, but of all the projects, left $818,000 in here because we could use fund balance reserves because we had an 18 surplus. Again, that doesn't typically occur or happen. And then the other thing was when we went back and we really looked within the capital improvement project fund, we were able to identify and utilize about $306,000 in undesignated accumulation there for projects. And again, that's nothing that's going to repeat. So aside from those 3 things, I think big topics, economic redevelopment, we are doing general fund transfers of $975,000. We got to acknowledge that there are several key things that have been current discussion and topic points that are not currently included in here. So right now, fiscal year 20 budget, 21 and out years excludes any funding or additional contribution to the Maryland Theater for its expansion project. It excludes contributions specifically related for a Dolman Black Heritage Museum. It excludes funding for a second sheet of ice at the ice rink. It excludes any funding towards construction or acquisition of a sportsplex. It excludes funding for a new or renovated minor league baseball stadium. It does, however, include the continuation of funding $405,000 towards the 911 center. It includes $25,000 additional operating dollars to help with our overall marketing and branding initiative. There's no changes in full-time staffing, and right now within this budget, based on where we currently are seeing vacancies, it includes $425,000 in the general fund in anticipation of funded vacancy savings. The electric fund, no different than what we reported back in February. Big picture there is the wholesale power contract is in place through May of 2022, and basically what that does is it sets not just our revenue, but it also sets the majority, 75% of all of our expenses. No change in full-time staffing levels for the electric fund. Water fund, we have recently approved, just as a reminder, a new 5-year rate study, and it's going to have included 3% annual increases starting fiscal year 20 through 24. No change in staffing levels there. Wastewater, also have the new approved 5-year cost rate study that was just approved, and it will go from fiscal year 20 through 24, and it includes 2% annual increases. No change in full-time staffing. Last but not least, in parking, we did approve rates last July that were effective through fiscal year 22, and those are continued to be included, which are $2 annual increases. No change in full-time staffing levels in fiscal year 20 are specifically included for parking. However, realistically, we do need to have a conversation about, realistically, does one full-time person covering a 24/7 operation really sufficient to cover our needs? And quite honestly, I think the answer to that is no. Third parking deck, the construction, revenue, operating expenses that we started to include in fiscal year 21 to have it be finished and completed in fiscal year 22. And then May 7th would be right now our public hearing for both the fiscal year 20 budget and property tax rate increase, followed by May 14th, the introduction of the ordinance for both of those, the fiscal year 20 budget and property tax rate. And then last but not least, hopefully, the goal is May 21st, the adoption of the ordinance for the fiscal year 20 budget and the property tax rate increase. Whew. High-level summary. So beginning next week, I think really the only question that we have is, unless there's objection, we just assume that we would be starting with the general fund and working our way through. So is the general fund topic first and foremost?
So, I know we're supposed to keep this short, and
That's okay.
I promised to only make a couple of comments. The first is this, you know, I appreciate the memo, and especially as it relates to the general fund. And I said this last year and the year before, the reality is most folks look at what the tax rate's gonna be. They look at what you're spending the general fund tax dollars on, and, you know, I think folks generally accept the utility funds are utility funds, and they're generally a business, and, you know, the rates you set are the rates you get because, you know, that's the cost of doing business for those utility side items. And, you know, the reality is our utility rates are low. Comparable to other communities, I'd love, you know, to see the comparative. So, as it relates to the general fund, you know, I realize you got a couple of big ticket items on here towards the bottom. And for me, those things are, you know, in the future items. I mean, they're drawing board items as it relates to what we need to be doing to balance the budget. And when I say balance the budget, I don't mean this year. I mean, we need our fiscal house in order, and I feel like that's what I've been trying to participate in the process of doing over the last couple of years. And so I try and focus on this top half of items, and it's not alarming, but it's definitely concerning when you see, you know, the way we're balancing it this year is about $1.5 million worth of maneuvering, one-time maneuvering, and you know, we did that a little bit last year, and we did it the year before, and so, you know, we look, and that's about the size of it, you know, as we only slowly gain the traction of a stable tax base, you know, we got $1.5 million that we sort of sit there and go, how are we gonna accomplish this? And so three of the items on the revenue side that, you know, that I'd like to focus on is, one, the stormwater management fee. I think it has to happen, you know, I think that's a reality. The second is the public utility tax. And the third is fair cost sharing of fire and rescue. And so for me, you know, in a perfect world over the next 6 years, I'd love to see the stormwater management fee be implemented. Us get about $250,000 to start out, and about 6 years from now, be at about $500,000. and be funding those MS4 obligations and stormwater management obligations that we have to make. The public utility tax, as it relates to this first third process, and I said this last year when we implemented that, the Invest Hagerstown, we adjusted all of the tax rate except for that one. I'd like to see that adjusted so we get an additional $250,000 a year, and over the 6-year period, get that up to about $300,000. I think that's a fairly marginal, incremental increase. And the fire and rescue stuff, I think, when you look at it flat out, if the county were to treat us fair, like all the other municipalities and all the other volunteer fire companies that receive funding, it's about $500,000 to start out. And I think over that 6-year period, as the county takes on more of a paid fire and rescue sort of obligation, that differential will reach about $1 million, again, in a perfect world. On the expense side, I think we need to look at contributions. And I know I've heard other council members say this individually, that if we're dipping into funds that we don't really have to pay, or to provide funds to entities, that have funds on hand, so to me, that's about $100,000. I don't think it's big. I think operations wise, we could achieve efficiencies of about $250 a year. And I think staffing costs, we sit in here and I see the vacancy, and I don't think that's a sustainable number to say we're gonna save $400,000 a year. I think that number's probably you could use a stable sort of decreasing number, declining number of about $250 a year. And that to me, over a 6-year period, sort of identifies that what I'll call, climbing process of getting to that $1.5 million, over that 6-year period to establish about 6 cents worth of fiscal stability. And for the average taxpayer, to put that in perspective, about $72 a year. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but that's what 6 cents is, basically on the tax rate. The average taxpayer is about $72, $80 a year. And in the grand scheme of things, you have to decide which one of those items are important enough to you, as an electorate, to convey to your body, to decide which one of these other amenity items, you want to have happen. And that's why I sort of put them on that second burner of, okay, the fiscal things are in order, now what are those amenity items that you actually want to do, actually want to see happen, actually want your tax dollars going toward. So that's my 2 cents for this evening.
I agree with you on looking at contributions we're making to entities that have reserves, insufficient reserves to run themselves for a while. I don't see any purpose to taking the taxpayer dollars and building up or bolstering up reserves of some entities that don't need it to operate.
I would only comment, Mayor, that I guess last Monday we had an MML meeting, and one of the guests was an accountant who apparently specializes in municipals and doing their audits and stuff, and was saying how she's very aware of the amount of communities that have problems with audits and this problem and that problem, and how they're there to solve those problems and resolve them. And my only thought was, well, she's obviously not talking to the city of Hagerstown. You should be congratulated on the awards you get every year and on the audit that we get every year that for us is routine. It's like turning your tap water and expecting to get good clean water and turning the electric switch. We've come to expect that we're going to get an absolutely clean audit and that you're going to get an award every year for excellence in accounting. And I think that needs to be recognized instead of just expected. And congratulations and thank you.
I will only add to this conversation with the $400,000 for the 911 center and the other fire and rescue conversations. We sent a letter last Friday to the Board of Commissioners on behalf of the council. Thank you guys for agreeing to send that with a couple different requests regarding our fire service and fair treatment of funding. So I hope that we get a response, and I think now with the conversations they're having in the county is the time to push this issue, because it clearly is unfair. I think the 5, 6 of us would agree with that, and I think yeah, now is the time to continue pushing that conversation.
I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
I'm not going to repeat what everyone said.
Right,
Yes.
Yeah.
including the agency contributions.
Yes.
And one that we're specifically looking at that you can figure things.
And I do want to acknowledge and thank Councilmember Alshire. We did separately include, and I forgot to in my bullet points, but we did include on page 14 an item for stormwater management. So one of the things is Rodney has been moving forward with the information in the first phase of stormwater. We have sat down accounting, engineering, public works, and have separated out, and I will say the dollars right now that we have in stormwater in the operating side that's currently within the general fund is $761,000 for fiscal year 20. And then we've slowly started pulling them out in the CIP side and identifying them with an SWM. $563,000 in fiscal year 20, but much larger in the project side in fiscal year 21 through 24. So on page 14, we started to break that out so that we could see what the impact was if that was a separate fee and utility. And again, the $761,000 is based on what we're currently staffing and what we're currently doing in our operations. So I think before you said like 500, at least you'd be shocked if it wasn't easily 500.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you both.
All right, Rodney, transportation priorities?
Good afternoon. It's that time of year again where we send a list of our priorities for transportation to State Highway. They compile them from across the state, and they basically put together a budget book for transportation, just like you just reviewed. So I gave you a list in the packet. Honestly, it's the same projects as last year. I changed the order a little bit. So I'll go through them quickly, but many of these are moving forward, and not in part because they're in your priority letter every year. And so this is a significant thing that we're sending them. So I have listed 6 on here. The first one is the Eastern Boulevard corridor improvements. We know that the county is going to be advertising the bridge for professional court later this year. But just as important to me is they're also working with the state to improve the intersection of Eastern Boulevard and Route 64. If you go up Eastern Boulevard, our section of Eastern, in the evening, it's ugly. And most of it's because that intersection at 64, Jefferson Boulevard, there's not enough capacity there. So it's bottlenecking it. So the state and the county are working together to improve that intersection. I think we should encourage that, because it's good for our section of Eastern Boulevard. For I-81, in March, there was a new grant submitted, an infra grant submitted to Federal Highways for funding of the next phase of 81, where it leaves off in the current phase is down at Williamsport there at Route 11, and the next phase would take it up to Halfway Boulevard. We should know by June. That's a county and state-led effort, but it's good for the community to support that in general. The dual highway, there was a study done, if you recall, in 2015 that looked at some of the pedestrian fatalities and injuries that happened on the dual highway. It was an excellent study that was put together by our Metropolitan Planning Organization. And we sent the State Highway a letter in March of 2016 endorsing that study. And I'm happy to say that the first phase of the construction is going to happen now later this year. They're going to spend about $1.5 million on sidewalks on the dual highway, and a lot of them are really needed. And I think because the city kept pushing that, I think that's going to happen now. That's just the first phase, but it's the part in the city. So that's good news there. The tourism signs are the brown attraction signs, or whatever you want to call them. And we've been working on that for a few years, but because of the priority letter and pushing the state, they've advanced the schedule for the installation. So the installation now will be in the spring of 2020. Our community badly needs these. Our signs around the community are very faded and outdated. If you go east or west of here, in those towns of like Cumberland and Frederick, their transportation attraction signs or tourist attraction signs are far better. And that's what ours will look like when these are done. So we want to keep pushing on that. We have other programs that we get money from, including sidewalk installation, bikeway grants, safe routes to school. Those programs we've received well over $2 million in the last 10 years from, and we want to ask them to continue to keep those going. And then highway user revenue was always number one. I've moved it down to number 6 because we've kind of arrived finally, as Michelle said earlier, $1,724,000 will be coming our way, and that's fantastic. At one point, it was down to $75,000, so we want to keep that going too. Those are my suggestions for your priorities.
Great job.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
So I'll have a letter for you to sign, Mayor. Send that.
Historic City Farmers Market update.
Good evening, I think. How's everyone? So, here we are. We're here to talk about giving you an update to the farmers market operations and to seek direction for you on a few aspects of the operation of the market. We last reported to you on the market about 11 months ago. At that time, you directed our department, DCED, to offer a 3-month free rent promo for new vendors. This incentive was publicized in multiple ways, including social media, website postings, press releases, e-casts, print advertising in the Herald Mail, flyers, and actually reaching out to vendors from previous pop-up shops and other markets around the county. In addition, we have had numerous events at the market throughout the year to drive foot traffic into the market house, including a May Day event, spring cleaning yard sale and ice cream at the market event, Harvest Day, Veterans Day Thanks, the Hub's Hug event, a Valentine's Day event, and live music that was performed 8 times. As a result, we have had 27 new vendors try the market out during this trial period. 5 of those are still in their trial period, so they're still assessing the experience. 8 of those vendors have transitioned to become paying vendors. 1 has indicated that she may return later in the spring because she's more of a seasonal summertime vendor, and 13 chose not to return. Just as a point of reference, at that time last May, there were 14 paying vendors as well as the Valley Co-op. And this, at the same time, the second quarter billing, we have 17 paying vendors plus the Valley Co-op. And the income has gone from just over $5,000 in revenue for that quarter to over $6,000 in revenue. So at least we're heading in the right direction. There's a spreadsheet attached to the memo packet that shows the revenue and expenses of the market over the last 3 fiscal years, as well as our current and FY20 budget projections. We expect the FY19 net expense to be just over $48,000 and the FY20 net expense to be just over $52,000. So we are particularly interested in hearing from you about 3 specific items with regards to the market operations. The first is, has to do with the catalyst projects. 6 of the catalyst projects out of 8 were prioritized in your goals document. And so we would like to know, do you want us to maintain the same level of staff effort on the farmers market as on the other catalyst projects?
So, okay, so we went from 14 total vendors to 17.
17 paying vendors.
Paying.
Plus there's currently 5 that are there, not paying yet, but are actually in the market.
Those are the vendors that stepped forward when we implemented the
Yes.
program of come in and try it out
Correct,
at no cost
correct.
for a certain period of time. So we're able to get 5, and so over what period of time did it take to get those 5 new ones?
Well, we've actually had, I think you missed that part. We've had 27 new vendors since last May who've tried out the trial period.
And 5 have stayed.
No.
8.
8 have actually now become paying vendors. 5 are still in their 3-month period, so they won't come up until July 1.
And 13.
And 13 have not returned.
So I go back to this question, it's on our urban partners, priorities. And I go back to this question, that I asked, gosh, it feels like 4 or 5 years ago when I suggested that, we head in this direction. Because if you got no vendors, then you got no amenity. And so the effort was to see, would anybody even want to come in if it was absolutely free? So then I have to have this question, and I know that you lose revenue, but we're in the grand scheme of things compared to other amenities that the city offers, it's peanuts. I mean, in the grand scheme of the budget, this is peanuts we're talking about, and you either want a farmer's market or you don't. I guess, and I realize it costs us to keep the place open, and it doesn't look like on this chart that there are included in here our capital associated costs either. So in other words, what I see on this chart you provided of 3 years are the operational, not the debt service. That's a whole nother amount of money, probably double that number on the expense side. And so, we're automatically losing, if you will, $60,000 a year on debt service that we've committed to. And I'm just going to use that as the average number. We're losing, so to speak, about $60,000 a year to operate the thing. And so let's just say for simplicity's sake, it's $120,000, $130,000 a year it costs us to keep this thing open. And in return, we get about $30,000 back out of that 120 or 130 to keep this thing open. And if it's going to garner filling the thing with vendors and actually making it a destination, which is what you want in the Urban Partners Plan for it to be and to do, why not just make it free and make a complete go of it? In other words, will that attract the mass quantity of vendors that you want to see, in there on the number of days you want it to be open and functioning to make it happen? And when I hear 27, I would like to know, before we offered that, when's the last fiscal period we had 27 vendors try it out? You know what I mean? I'd be hard pressed to believe we've had 27, you know what I mean, in the 3 full
maybe
paying
the-
years prior to that.
A good question with that, Kristen, is how many of those, we know 13 didn't come back. I'd be curious, and I don't know if you can answer this later or not, how many of those 13 would have stayed if we would have told them they could stay for nothing?
Right. And I think those are great questions, because I'm looking at $30,000, you know what I mean? And if you told me that it would cost me $30,000 to accomplish the goal of having this place have 25 vendors in it versus 15 vendors, I would say save the $30,000 and get the other 10 vendors, because that's 10 more vendors worth of people coming down to participate in this amenity, which is really what it is. I mean, this isn't some self-supporting, item of the city. It hasn't been probably for decades, and probably since the old Y left, if I had to sort of, pin a point in time. If what do you have, $29,000 is what we project, to sort of make next year? I'd be curious.
Well,
if we just said
and,
it's free
well,
for a vendor to come in.
I would never bet on you.
Who are you?
On what position you're gonna take on something, because this is.
But that's what I've been saying the whole. But that's what I've been saying the whole time is. In fact, I said this 5 years ago. I don't know why. Even when I was a vendor there, I'm like, why are we charging $30,000 a year for something we're spending $160 on? In fact, 5 years ago, I said we'd be better off to just turn it over to a grocery store and pay them $50,000 a year to bring a real grocery store in. We had those conversations.
we did, and not only that, but what Kristen is saying is ultimately the answer to, can we have a viable farmer's market? Because there's a couple decision trees here. If you do open it up and make it free and you don't get the vendors, That certainly tells you
That's
something.
telling.
If you open it up for free and you do get the vendors, this is just a guess, but my guess is if you do that and you fill that place up, within 2 years, you're gonna have vendors saying it's time you start charging again, because we gotta get rid of some of these people, and you're going to have enough foot traffic to make it worth everybody's while. I'm not
Right.
sure of that, but
Well, but 2 years ago, when we had these conversations, you know, and, you know, I participated in some of them with the vendors, and we just had folks make comments just last week or so on this. You know, when you go to Shepherdstown and Baltimore and all these other places, and they all function, you know, in different sort of settings, but one commonality among them is they all generally have sort of parameters on how they function. You know, what is considered, you know, a vendor that's eligible to participate. And all I'm saying is, I think it's almost a two-prong approach, that if you're going to go that route, you're gonna have to establish some, you know, some of these
Standards.
parameters that vendors that are going to other markets are going there because they enjoy the parameters that the group collectively has agreed to live by, to function by. And so I think that I think those two things would have to go hand in hand.
To steer you back to my question, which was, do you want us to maintain the same level of staff effort on this catalyst project as the other 6 that were mentioned in your goals document? It sounds like, I don't know, just maybe less, because you're saying there's no billing now, potentially.
Does Main Street have anything to do with the farmer's market? Does Main Street help to?
It does not.
But, no, I mean, I'm not,
It's not in the Main Street district, I think. It's not in the,
I'm not saying we cut the expense side at all. I'm saying that the impetus here is to improve the participation side. And, you know, the revenue stream to offset the expense side isn't of value enough if we can get, you know what I mean, if we can get it full, or at least, you know, significantly fuller than it is at such an incremental loss of revenue, to do so. I think that, you know, I feel like,
I'm fine with that.
maybe you guys
approach.
weren't here when we had those conversations, but I mean, I feel like that's where we were back when we said we'd actually save money by paying a grocery store to be here. I mean, I know that,
If you open it up and make it for free, and all of a sudden the door's stampeded with people wanting, how do you?
that would be awesome.
well, then you,
I mean,
that
That's a good
problem, I love that
It's a
problem.
good problem, yeah,
Yeah.
but how do, you know, how do you say no to somebody?
And parameters.
I think the vendors are the best professionals in the business, you know what I mean, to, you know, to establish some of that governance. And I realize that there's, you know, a discord to some degree on that, you know, by varying vendors. I realize that some want to be open sometimes and some others, and some want these types of things and others want those, but, I mean, we're not inventing the wheel here. You know, you can look at viable farmers markets and say, hey, what do you guys do, you know, to make this a go? Because they're in Middletown, and they're in Myersville, and they're in Shepherdstown, you know, and you know, the outlets, and you lean on Leslie a little bit to say, hey, the ag, I think she's still with the ag, so to say, hey, you know, what are some of the things you think we should do?
I would say we try it for a year and see what happens.
We're not losing any,
Right?
we're not
It's
losing any.
$24,000 really. But try it for a year and see what happens if we make it free.
And I'm not saying diminish staff at all
But
toward that
it's,
effort.
I still don't think the market's gonna succeed unless it's open longer hours. It's gotta be open past noon.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that was the next.
That was the
bullet
second.
point
And that is my
where-
second question, is there support for expansion of the market hours? You know,
Yeah. I
you
think
heard
that
last
there
week
has
about
to
going to
Has to
2.
be.
I think there has to
Has
be.
to
Yeah.
be.
And so with that, because we know that there's not vendor consensus about staying open till 2, because we've talked to them in the past about this, is there support for us to work with the vendors to rearrange the market so that we could have a section that is, you know, that closes at 12, because Some of them don't want to stay or cannot stay past 12, and the section where those are the people that do want to stay past 12.
I have no problems with it.
Yeah.
As long as we're not responsible for the security of the
Right.
stuff. If they want to leave it there,
Well,
that's up to them.
Right,
We'll
and
let
that's,
them lock it up.
they should know that, but it's become this, you know,
Yeah.
it has taken on a different kind of,
Oh, it's a contentious
Yeah,
conversation
it
about
is.
those things, completely. I mean, like I said,
but
I
I mean,
sat
it's
through
gonna
some
be,
of those. and-
it will be contentious even asking some of them to move.
But having
But
it for free and,
But-
you know, makes
free,
it a
we're gonna
little
move you.
bit, yeah, probably makes it a little more appealing to stay past 12, okay.
At some point, we have to decide
Great,
the parameters we're going to institute to make it viable or
Right.
not.
Right.
Exactly.
And I
to
feel like
work
we
or
have
not.
just skirted that with a 10-foot pole for a number of years.
It's kind of like fire and rescue. Same idea.
and,
Skirting issue.
what you brought up before about parameters, perhaps on how many vendors selling baked goods versus how many vendors selling craft things or painted furniture or prepared food. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well,
We would like you to.
I think that, you know, with the representatives that we had last week, you know, it was interesting because both of them sold baked goods, so they were kind of saying that one of them shouldn't stay in a way, you know? So, you know, where do you find that? Is cinnamon rolls one thing and cakes another?
Well-
I don't think so.
But that's where I think you have to engage the expertise of folks in that industry like Leslie. I mean, I think she's a good resource if she's able to participate in that type of discussion with city staff and with the vendors, and looking at what other existing markets, you know, around the region already do. You know, and I go back to the example of Shepherdstown, but I mean, you know, there's an example where I know that they have parameters, and I spoke to a number of vendors that go there instead of come here, and the reason that they go there instead of coming here. And I realize some of that's market-driven, but it's also structure driven and cost. I mean, it's, you know, 10 or 15 bucks to go and set up, not, you know, a committal of you know, 40 or 50 bucks a month.
For staff clarity then, for Kitty, Jill to come back, say the first week of May, this gives them some time to flesh it out. Come back with a work session discussion where they will offer the hours that it'll be operated, work through that with who's there now. And then we'll also have a discussion on the amount that we're gonna forego in revenue. So right now, it's budgeted at $16,000 for stall rentals, and the net expense was $52,000. So the council will be subsidizing it to the tune of $68,347 for fiscal year '20. Well, it sounds like everyone's in agreement with that. So have the work session discussion, and then we'll move forward in for a May motion stating the hours of service and that the mayor and council have agreed to remove all of the charges for the stalls. Does that make sense?
And do you want the parameters in there too, something about that? Because I feel like that's going to come up again.
Will you have enough time to flesh that out? That could come back later. That can be
Okay.
set just by a discussion with council. I think those are the two major items
Yep,
that
okay.
you could actually accomplish in that amount of time. Does everyone agree, or you want more in it?
That sounds good.
I think that's a good start.
And again, I think let's try it for a year and see what happens. And if this doesn't do it, then
Then we know.
we know, and we don't have to have this discussion anymore.
Excellent.
Right?
Okay. Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty.
Thank you, Kitty.
City administrator.
I have none.
Shirley?
No, I don't have
Lou?
any.
I do. Two things. I really want to congratulate Jimmy Klein and all of those responsible for the Vietnam Memorial.
Yeah.
I should not be surprised at what a superb job those folks did with that memorial. It's something to be very proud of. And if everybody else agrees, I would love us to invite Jimmy and the appropriate folks back to a city council meeting to express our appreciation in this setting versus the setting that was. And the only other thing I have to say is when I looked at the budget book tonight and saw how much money the city has budgeted for their Maryland International Film Festival, it's hard to believe the amount of bang we get for our buck from that. And I want to congratulate Tracy and everybody involved with that. It's a wonderful thing. I think our budget book said $1,500 for next year. So.
It needs to be
boy,
more than that.
well,
If you talk about bang for buck,
yeah, so, but, yeah, when we look at public
Keep
functions.
in
and-
mind, before we start adding more money to
Right,
that.
no, we're not being asked for more money than
No,
that,
we're
which
not.
is, which is a very
And
good
one of the
thing.
great things that they wanted from the city of Hagerstown was to do something about the projector at the Maryland Theater and be able to upgrade that so they could show quality films, and that is happening. And
Good.
we are a part of that. So.
No, that's great, I'm just saying, it was a wonderful thing, and, those are two people who need to be congratulated for making our city a better place. Thank you.
Awesome.
echo the same thing for both, for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial it's exceeded my expectations. And I spent all 3 days down at the Maryland International Film Festival and got to talk to people from all over the country, all over the world, from France, from Germany, from Alaska, from all over LA, the West Coast, Mississippi, filmmakers, producers, and everything else up here. And it was really gratifying. I mean, I was at every after party until I couldn't stay anymore, and they were still going strong, and the bars were still pumping beer and everything else. And I just for the amount of impact this has on economic development. I had a customer come into town on Saturday, brought his airplane up, and he was planning on being here for the whole week to work on it and do some stuff with us here. And he figured, he'll fly into Hagerstown and he'll just get a hotel and he'll be here for the weekend. There were no rooms anywhere in Hagerstown. He had to drive to Frederick to get a hotel room for the weekend. And, I mean, every hotel room was packed. And every night downtown, Bulls and Bears, 28 South, the restaurants that were open, that decided to be open, they were booming. And, I mean, this was, a real economic development boon. And what was really interesting was talking to the people, the producers. Some of them have been here every year for the last 6 or 7 years for the film festival. This is the 8th year. And it was really gratifying to talk to them. They all said, number one, how much they like coming to Hagerstown, and number two, how much improvement they see every year when they come. And exponentially this year with all the development, the Maryland Theater and everything else, and it just, they are really pleased with what they see. It's 180 degrees out from what we get in town here sometimes from our own local people, and it begs, we've got an item in the budget there about image. We've got some money budgeted to try to improve our image. That could not have been emphasized any more than talking to these people, because they really loved it, and I'm excited for next year. It's the only things that they mentioned that they would like to see that they thought are a problem, they have outgrown some of the screening areas, and I can attest to that. I sat in some that I'm glad the fire marshal didn't come in, but we need some more seating capacity and some more venues to show films.
Next year, the Maryland Theater will be
We'll have that.
open and have it.
Yeah.
A whole nother stage.
But yeah, I mean, it's growing. They want to see it grow more, and I think this is something that's a real boon to the city.
Yes.
Kristen? Emma?
So I had the privilege this Saturday to speak at a Girl Scout event, thanks to Shelley. And it was about 100 young women, ages, I think, 6th grade to senior year. And they went through all kinds of workshops, like college prep, how to feel beautiful, how to feel confident. And they also had social media bullying and how to deal with it as a woman. And I get to do a lot of these things as a woman in office, since it's only Shelley and I. And I normally post it on my council page, and it never, ever, ever, ever fails that someone goes on there. It happened after I spoke to Kristen's daughter's class at McKay Dowd about women's issues. Someone always says, oh God, why are we teaching these little girls that they're different from men and blah, 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 blah. So I just want to address this a second because I get all kinds of messages from people, and I normally don't entertain the trolls and don't want to give them their 5 seconds of fame, but I'm going to for a second. So we get these messages and portray these characters. And I was really, really lucky growing up because I had a mom and dad who just let me be me. When I was 14, I decided I wanted to shave my head and dye it pink. I went home and asked for permission, and my parents were like, sure, whatever. As long as I did well in school, they didn't care if I shaved my head and dyed it pink. It was purple for a while. I had a mohawk for a while. I've always just been a weirdo, and luckily my parents just let me be that, and I've always been confident in who I am. But I get messages all the time, wild stuff like, I don't know why people are so obsessed with my hair out there. Yes, I have a can I speak to the manager haircut, and no, I do not care if you don't like it. I don't care if you don't like that it's purple. I don't care if you don't like it's pink, whatever. But this weekend, this is my favorite one. I was at the film festival on Friday night. I wore a dress. So just a quick anatomy lesson. I have boobs, all right? And I know I'm talking about boobs on camera, but they're there. We all have them. We don't control where they go. They're in the same spot every day. So I pose in pictures with people, post it on my council page, and I get a message by a 60-year-old grown man telling me that I need to knock it off because when I lean over on people, my boobs are on them. Well, sorry, I can't throw them over my shoulder. I shouldn't have to be accountable to where my breasts are. So the next time I post about speaking to young women, this is why. Because they would never, ever, ever message a man. Jeff Klein, God love him, I like him, I consider him a friend. He poses with women all the time. And I guarantee no one is contacting Jeff Klein and saying he's leaning too close to a woman. So the guy told me, quote unquote, knock it off. I will not knock it off. I can't strap them down. I'm not going to, even if I could, because I'm particularly fond of them. So I'm sorry that as a grown woman I have to be held accountable to my breasts and to my makeup and to my hair and to my figure and to my clothes. But little girls, this is what you have to deal with. And if I have to stand in front of them and tell them that it's okay to be proud of their breasts and their hair and their wardrobe and their hoop earrings and their can I speak to the manager haircut, I will continue to do it. Whatever camera is on me, thank you right now to the internet trolls. So that is all I have this evening.
Since I don't know what can I talk to the manager haircut is, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.